Hello? Hello? Hello. Hey, so let's get started. It's 12 o'clock exactly, according to our nice clock in the back there. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate that. Jonathan and I really do appreciate you taking your time out of your day to come to our session. Just a quick show of hands. How many people here are 100% web development? Okay. How many people here are like app developers but don't do web development? Just a couple of you. Okay, great. So most of the audience here are web developers, so that's good to know. So let's start out by introducing ourselves. My name is Ralph Whitbeck. I am a board member on the jQuery Foundation. I've been there for on the board. Before it was the board, it was a team since '09. I'm also a team member on the jQuery mobile team. I'm the developer relations advocate there. And I work for a company called Appentu, and we do front-end consulting and training. And my position there is I am the modern web advocate for Appentu's tools and services.
And I am Jonathan Sampson. I'm the Director of Solutions Delivery at Appentu. And also super excited to say I'm an IEE MVP, given all the recent updates to the Internet Explorer browser. And we both happen to be user agents as well, which is kind of an advocate for web standards on the open web. And working with Internet Explorer and the team there, you can check us out on useragents.ie.
Yeah, it's a great little program where we're advocating for cross-browser development and modern web technologies, especially with IE10 and IE11. So, pretty exciting. Today we want to talk to you about developing Windows Store apps with web technologies, particularly HTML5, jQuery, JavaScript, CSS3. Back in 2011, at the first build, it was announced when Windows 8 was a preview that you could be able to develop your applications using web technologies like HTML5 and JavaScript. And we got really excited. And so when the previews came out and we downloaded them and we started just basically copying and pasting some simple apps demos that we had done and brought them in, we noticed that jQuery, one of the tools that's probably essential in our work at the time was, wasn't ready for the security context that the Windows Store apps were providing. And so, last year at this time, we came to build, and we were talking with some Microsoft employees about that, and we quickly put together what it would take. We put together a prototype jQuery version based on 1.8, and we hosted it on our GitHub repo, and we quickly figured out where the problems were, what needed to be changed. We were able to demo that at last year's build, and we took that knowledge and we went to the core team and had discussions with them, worked with them on pull requests, and got a lot of the changes that needed to be done into jQuery. And we're proud to announce, as of a couple of months ago, jQuery 2.0 is now ready for developing Windows Store 8 apps. So that's exciting. So some of the things we learned, and Jonathan's going to go into that, we learned a bunch of things. And Jonathan, why don't you explain some of those?
Yeah, so the process of getting jQuery to work inside a Windows Store app itself was not that difficult. There was just not so much technical problems, but we had some behavioral issues that we had to overcome. So being web developers, we're used to doing things a certain way. We have long-held conventions that we all understand and love, and we just assume that they're going to work the way they do on the web. Fortunately, the road has been paved for us, and we had alternative routes that we could take. One of the things that was complicated was the way that we're using inner HTML. Typically, whenever we're constructing form elements on the fly and stuff, we just drop the full string of HTML into inner HTML, and if it has a name attribute on it, that's considered unsafe code. This is stuff that could be leveraged by someone who's got malicious intents. They could sneak their code up into a transaction on yours and wind up having your form submit data that you weren't expecting. And so there's various different ways that we can work around that. jQuery itself has long had this signature called the HTML5 or HTML prop signature, so you can create an HTML element by passing in markup as the first parameter of the jQuery function. You guys probably all know that. Next, you can pass in as the second parameter, which is oftentimes the context. You can pass in an object literal that has attributes and values, and then those are all mapped to that newly created element and returned to you. And so that's something you can do to kind of sidestep these security concerns. And so we had to do that throughout the jQuery source itself, and then also in the Scissor selector engine as well.
So what we're going to do today is we're going to do some live coding examples, a couple of quick demos. I'm going to do one. Jonathan's going to do one. The first one we're going to do, quick little Windows Store app with jQuery. We're going to walk you through using jQuery, jQuery UI, an awesome little utility component library that we built at Append2 called Amplify.js. And of course, we're going to use a little bit of Win.js in there as well. Jonathan, what are you going to cover?
I'm going to be starting from the same foundation of jQuery, since we both love and adore that. Tossing in require, because I'm sure we have a lot of people who dig modules. Knockout for front-end binding, and Win.js as well, since it's kind of right at home in this area.
So the cool thing is, Jonathan is a former moderator at Stack Overflow. I'm a good advocate for Stack Overflow as well. So we're going to build a couple of apps using the Stack Overflow API. So let's pray for the Wi-Fi gods that everything works good, and let's also pray to the live coding gods. Thank you, God. You're all good and mighty. The last thing we're going to do, I'm just going to show you a quick app that I built over the weekend that sort of had real-world capabilities. It's a cool little story. So let's get started. We're going to build a quick app.
Here we go.
Here we go.
Boom, 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 boom.
So we will start up our Visual Studio. We will go to File, New Project. Here we want to go down to our templates, JavaScript. We're going to go to Windows Store. We're just going to pick a blank app. So I'm going to call this one Whitbeck, because that's my name. All right. So this will start up a project. So we get some cool things out of the box. We get a default HTML page. We get a default JS page, which gives us some ability to do some saving of state if we needed to do that. We're not going to touch this today, a little outside of our scope. And we also get a default CSS, which is kind of cool. It provides an ability to do some global CSS as well as some media queries, so that we can target specifically which orientation that we want to go into. So we'll go into that a little bit later. First thing we want to do is we want to grab. We want to start pulling in jQuery. And we're going to use NuGet. We're going to pull in some packages. We can see here our attempts earlier failed because we weren't connected to the Wi-Fi properly. So if you go to nuget.org, you can do a search for all these packages that we're going to pull down, and you can get the proper syntax for pulling that down. So we're going to do install package, and we're going to pull down jQuery first. And this is a package that's kept up by Damian Edwards. He does a great job. He usually keeps this up to date within a day or two after a release. So that pulled the files down and created a scripts folder and put all the relevant files in there. Next thing we're going to do is we want to use jQuery UI in this demo as well. So we'll do install package jQuery.ui, and they all have their own little unique names and how to install that. So we bring that down. It's going to check for the dependency of jQuery. We already have it. If it didn't have it, it would pull down the version of jQuery that it had in its package. As you can see, a lot of things are happening over here. It's pulling in all the theme files, everything that's there. So in scripts, we now have a couple of jQuery UI files. Oops. We also have this content folder that created, and this is where our theme got created. So within here, we have a base theme with all the CSS files that are in there. Great. And then the last thing we want to do is we're going to use the component library Amplify. That's also available on NuGet, so we can do install package again, and then do Amplify. Amplify.js. Also checks for jQuery dependency. It does work with jQuery 2.0, and that gets installed in the scripts folder as well. So there you go. All right, let's get started. Let's first start with, let's just talk about what we're going to do. So what we're going to do, it's going to be a simple application. It's going to be a couple different pages. First page is going to be like a sort of list of all the users that we're gonna display. It's sort of we're going to utilize the Gravatar images that you upload in your profile. When you click on that, it's going to go to a separate page. We're going to use jQuery UI tabs just to go through a couple of different tabs just to see some data that we're going to grab. So let's go to default.html. And I can just, I advocate for copy paste, so I'm just going to, I've already got this here. I'm not going to type this all out. And
serve up some delicious copy pasta today for everybody.
Yeah, I'll just copy paste and then run this through with you guys real quickly. I'll go up to here for now. Okay. So just paste. So I'm starting first with the app container. So I'm just a div to contain everything. I'm going to have a title. I'm using the header tag, Stacker Tracker. I'm going to call the first container that's going to have all our user images. I'm going to call that sidebar. It's going to be a list, so we'll just create an empty unordered list. Then the second page, I'm going to call that data canvas for whatever reason. And it's going to have a jQuery UI tab. So here is pretty standard markup for jQuery UI tabs. We're going to have three tabs: profile, badges, and tags. So nothing major there. All right. Let's go to, well, now that we have some HTML, let's just drop in some CSS. I'm not going to go into this too much, but just for styling purposes, just want to drop in some CSS in here. Nothing major that we need to talk about other than I did some specific queries for when the application is snapped onto the side. So when you drag application in from the left, you can snap it. And if it's got like a small little vertical space, we wanted to just resize the images there. So that's all I've done there. Okay, let's go into the good stuff. Back to default real quick, because we haven't included any of our scripts or anything like that yet. So let's do that now. First, I'm not going to use the minified versions for this purpose, but let's drop in jQuery. Let's drop in jQuery UI. Let's drop in our Amplify. And then let's drop in our default CSS for
there it is on 15.
Wrong one. We want to drop in our theme CSS. So we want to do that right after our WinJS theme file that's up there. A couple other things we're going to eventually want, so I'll do that now before I don't forget, is we're going to create two JavaScript files. One is just straight old scripts. So I'll just create a script folder or a script file. And then the second one, and this is the one we're going to start with, is called Ajax definitions. Ajax definitions.js. All right. So this is where we're going to start playing with the Amplify code library there, the component library. And what we're going to do is we're going to use Amplify. It has three different components. We're going to use the request component, which is basically allows us to define Ajax calls to endpoints. And then we can call those Ajax definitions anywhere within our code. This allows us to be able to abstract out our Ajax calls so that we can, if the endpoints change, we can change them all in one place. Also, if the backend team is working on the endpoints at the same time you're working on the front end, we can actually change those definitions to be mock data instead of actual pointing to endpoints. And so we could actually have two files, one that has mock data, one that has actual data, and then we could just swap the two when we need to. And so this is what it'll look like. So we want to start with Amplify. We want to do amplify.request.define. And then we're going to just give it a name. So Jonathan Rocks.
This is part of the library, by the way. Everyone has to use that.
So then we're going to give it a definition, or what kind of Ajax request we're going to use. We're going to say we're going to use Ajax. There are a bunch of other things we could use. And then the other thing is we want to give it a hash of what defines this AJAX request. So particularly like where's the endpoint? So maybe it's at users, and we want to look at specifically an ID. So this is defining what the URL is, what the endpoint is, and then perhaps we want to look at what type of request are we going to get at, and we're going to do a get. We can also do caching, a lot of other things that we can do with this. So this is basically what we're going to do to define our endpoints, and then somewhere down in your code somewhere you're going to do amplify that request, and you're going to call it by its name. So Jonathan Rocks, and then we're going to pass in whatever parameters that it's looking for. So in this case, we're looking for ID, and so say we give it an ID, whatever one. And then a callback function with the data that gets returned, and then we can do whatever we want in there. And so that's it. That's pretty much amplify request. Pretty much, the 30-second overview. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do some copy pasty again because I like copy pasty. So copy pasty. My copy skills are not good. Select all, copy, select all, pasty. Okay, so later when we go back to the slides, there'll be a link to all the code up on GitHub. Up here in the comments is a link to Amplify.js. There's also a link on how to set this up with mocking requests. Elijah Manor wrote up a great article last year. And also, we're going to use the Stack Exchange API, and so there's a link to the documentation there. So we're going to define some variables here, basically our base path to our API. The API requires a site name because we could target specific names, specific sites within the Stack Exchange empire there. We're going to just specifically target Stack Overflow, and then some parameters that get attached to query string that I'm just going to add in here by default. And so we have 3 different AJAX amplify requests going on. We have got one just for a specific user, so we call it stacker.user. It's an AJAX request. We're building up a URL, and it's a get. We're also doing that with badges and tags. So user, all these requests just take in a user ID. So pretty simple. So let's go to scripts here, and let's start defining what we want to do. I'm going to save that file, Okay, let's go to our script file and start making this work. So I'm going to start with document.ready function. I like the shorthand version, less typing. So first thing we want to do is let's seed this application with a couple of different users. You like Stack Overflow, right?
Yeah, I think Stack Overflow.
Yeah, I like Stack Overflow.
Useful.
So we got a couple of users up here. Let's use us first. So let's copy pasty because lots of numbers, lots of stuff here. So we're just creating a JavaScript object called speakers. Give it some names, you, and then like our ID number. And then that is all, a JavaScript object is just being saved into each of these properties. So we're capturing our name and our ID. So next thing we want to do is probably just populate our list with our user. So let's go back, some more copy pasty so we don't have to watch me code. Copy, paste. All right, so we're going to populate users. We're going to pass it in the speakers object. We've created this function called populate users. It's just going to iterate over all the users. And then each user, it's going to call stacker.user. So amplify.request stacker user, which matches up to this definition up here. And then as we go through, we're going to grab the data. And we're going to grab data.items, so a little bit of knowledge of the JSON object that gets returned that I'm not going to go into a little bit. It returns everything into an items property, so I'm just going to grab everything there, data.items, and store it in a variable. And I'm also going to store that variable back into our speakers object. That way we don't have to recall for all this data again. So we're sort of caching that there. So if we need that data again, which we will use again, we're not making multiple calls back to the API.
And there's that jQuery signature, the HTML props there on line 15. Just has the HTML string in the first parameter there, and the object literal is the second. So the data ID will be mapped to the resulting list item as an attribute with the value of whatever is inside data item.userid.
And this is one of those things that we learned that makes this in that security context. That makes one of the things that we learned. If we do it this way, the security context is agreeable. If we do it other ways.
It's totally cool. Keeps your code concise. Otherwise, you have to do document.createElement and then a series of set attributes and makes everything long, verbose, and ugly.
Okay, so we're just creating an LI. We're going to throw in an image. We're using profile image. It's a gravatar, so we're setting its size to 300. We're giving it alt string, and then we're appending it all to that UL that we created. So, demo gods, live demo gods, please be nice. Let's fire up the simulators. We should get a couple of images after we start this. So here's our simulator. Here we start. Get our title.
Should be firing off a request right now.
Calling for request. Come on, Wi-Fi. All right.
We all knew this would happen. Yeah, was that reference to?
I did that before, too.
That's the same mistake that prevented us for like 15 minutes in the hotel room.
Thank
we
you.
spent 20 minutes hugging each other
Come up,
whenever we realized what this was.
You'll get a sticker afterwards. Thank you. I didn't put amplify in there either, did I? Nope, I didn't. I went to go do it, and then what stopped me from doing that? AJAX definitions, we need that as well. All right, let's try that.
There we go. Awesome.
So, great. We're thinking the demo gods, not me. Great. So let's continue on. So the next thing we want to do is, now that we've got images here, now we need to go into our next page with all our data. So we basically need a click event to fire. So I'm going to go into copy pasty mode again. Go down a little bit. So sidebar on. We're going to copy. Paste. So what we've done here, we're using jQuery's on event. We're using it in a delegate mode. So we're going to listen for events on the sidebar element, and we're going to listen for the click event on LIs. And what we're going to do is we're going to grab that ID that we're saving in the data attribute using jQuery's data method. We're going to cache it as ID. We're going to toggle our containers so that one is now hidden, one is now visible. We're going to get at the speaker object that we're looking for, that based on the ID that we passed in. I'm going to save that as speaker, and then we're going to call a bunch of functions, tab profile, tab badges, tab tags, pass in the speaker to each of those, and that's going to populate each of the tabs content area. So one thing we need is all those functions. So that's actually a quite considerable amount of copy paste. So we'll grab all that. Copy. I'm going to put that outside of the document.ready. So if we do this now, if we go and run this code, restart this simulator, pull that up, and we click on me, and we get speakers. Continue. Refire that. So we've now hid the sidebar. We've shown data canvas. Our tabs are being generated. So we can go into each of these tabs and we get, here's all the tags that I'm using. I'm a part of. Here's all the badges I've earned, 6 gold, and all the different types of badges I've earned. And then here's my profile when my profile was created. So that's basically the application. So how do I get back home? There's sort of no way to get back home. So let's fix that. And we're going to use WinJS here a little bit. We're going to use the app bar. So we're going to create an app bar that comes down to get us back home. So we'll go back up into, let's do it right here. So I'm going to go back to my code here. Let's copy some code again. The wheel is really touchy. All right. So here's a bunch of code. Copy. I need this too. Copy. Paste that in. All right, so what's happening here? We're creating a new variable called appbar. We're using the winjs.ui.appbar constructor. It takes 2 parameters. The first one is the element that we're going to work with. So if we created, like, say, a div container, we could actually pass the ID of that in there. We're going to use null, so that means the constructor is going to build an element for us and then insert it at the end. And then the second one is a hash of parameters that gets us going here, that describes what we're going to do with the app bar. So the layout, we're going to set that to custom. Placement, we're going to set it to top. What is the layout?
The layout is kind of the orientation of the placement of the icons themselves.
Great. Yeah. And then commands, these are the buttons that we'll push. So we're using the app bar command constructor. Same thing, we're using null instead of an element. So it'll create it itself. We're setting an icon to app bar icon home, setting a label. And then we're setting an on-click event, which basically is going to toggle the view and strip out all the HTML out of all the tab containers there, because we don't want any, if we select a different user, we don't want to be appending directly to what was already there. And then we have some functionality here for adding a user, which I'm going to comment out right now. If I hit save, and if we refresh. Oh, the last thing I wanted to show was we're appending appbar.element, so the property element on the appbar object. If you're using null, that's the element that gets created, and then we can append that to our body. So if I go into our simulator, go to mine, bring down the app bar, I can go home, and we just switch back. Now I can go back to Jonathan's account. I can go back home. Pretty easy. So the last thing we want to do is we want to create a dialog for adding a user. So again, we're going to go back to using just straight old jQuery UI. Go back to some copy-pasty stuff. So I'm not going to go into this too much. It's just straight up jQuery UI dialog. So I'm going to add some dialog code here, dialog with a form in it. So, a div, we add a title, some content, a form. No buttons, we're going to have the dialog do that. And then in our script tag, we're going to define our dialog. We're going to go back to script. Here. So here's our dialog code, and I'll go through this real quick. Paste that here. So add user, we're going to call dialog. We don't want it to auto-open. We set its width and height. We want it to be modal, so it'll be overlaying everything. We won't be able to interact with anything behind it. We're going to define our buttons. We want a submit button, which basically is pulling out the values from our form fields. We're going to save that into our speaker, into a new speaker. And we're going to populate those users and then close the dialog. We're also going to have a cancel button, which just basically closes the dialog, and then we have a close function, which just basically strips out all the values as we go along. So if we restart the simulator. pull that down, do add user. We get a ugly dialog that hasn't been properly styled yet, but
developers, not designers.
Yeah, right. Let's add Jeff Atwood, and because his user ID is easy to remember as 1. We submit that. His user comes in, and now we can grab that. So pretty simple application, I think.
Yeah,
right?
It's tracking stackers. So stacker tracker.
So now we're going to get a little more advanced, and Jonathan's going to show us some other friends that we can work with jQuery. So Jonathan?
Yeah, thank you. All right, so we get to work with a lot of cool stuff. Unfortunately, one of the first sessions that I came to here was a lot of the new Win.js stuff, and I didn't get to play with any of that. But I did learn that something I was doing pretty frequently is getting updated and modified, so I'm looking forward to all the new Win.js stuff. But let's start the way Ralph did with a new project. Did you call yours Webback? Or Ralph? Okay, I'm going to see you there, and I'll call mine Samson. It's going to be a blank app, because we don't need no help. And here we go. All right, so as Ralph pointed out, this is the first default file that's presented. It provides you a few application lifecycle endpoints or events that you can tie into to save state, basically manage your application whenever things are being shut down. We're not going to mess with that too much. I am going to jump into the tools and the library package manager. This is something that Ralph showed me, and I just about kissed him because I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. And I'm going to install a few of my dependencies. So we're going to install a package. You can tab forward to get that. Here comes jQuery. So wonderful. I'm like a file system wizard here. Okay, and I'm doing another one, install package. And this one's going to be require.js. And lastly, the front-end monster knockout.js. Oops. Okay, looks like I made it through that without anything blowing up, so that's good. I'm going to jump into the default HTML, and I can start here. So, of course, I'm going to pull in, everything is pretty modular. Knockout is going to work with require.js. jQuery is going to work with require.js. If you're using something like Backbone, you might have to patch it, unless you grab one of the AMD versions that are floating out there online somewhere. So I'm going to pull in require.js here. And how many people have used require.js already? Awesome. Cool. I just heard someone say awesome, I think. That's fantastic. Okay, so whenever you set that up, you also have to set up your data main attribute. And this is going to point to our main application entry point. So this is going to be our app.js. Save that. And we're going to come into JS and add a new file. Add a new item, rather. JavaScript and app.js. So inside here, let's see, we should see if we go type in console log foo, we should see that pop up, not on local machine. This needs to be in, oh goodness, here we go. We just lost 20 seconds. My condolences. Ralph? Yep. Here we go. Your desktop looks funny. Okay. And simulator. Now if require.js works, we should see inside the console foo. So require.js works right out of the box. That's fantastic. Let's see, we'll jump back into here. And we're going to go ahead and set up, we're working with jQuery Knockout, and we're going to set up another module. So we want to set up a few paths. So we're going to set up require.config. And inside here, we're just going to pass an object literal, and it's going to have a paths key with another object. And then inside here, we'll set up jQuery. This is going to go up one directory from the JS directory into scripts, and it's going to go to jQuery-2.0.2. And require.js is going to put that .js on there for us, so we don't have to worry about that. The next thing we're going to be adding is knockout, and that's in the same directory, so scripts/knockout-2.2.1. And the last thing is going to be this users module, which is going to be actually inside of a folder called modules users. And let me go ahead and add that real quick just so I don't forget. So we're going to add a new folder, modules, and we'll add a new item. This will be users.js. And And then inside here, we're going to go ahead and put our module. So we're going to define real quick what we're going to be using. We're going to be having a jQuery dependency on this as well as knockout. And we'll put in our function with jQuery and knockout all set up for us. And we can save that and jump back to the apps. So we've got our path set up. We've got our users module loaded in there. We've got jQuery knockout referenced. It's time to actually start with the main require method that we have here. So we're going to be loading jQuery and knockout and users. Put the parameters in there so we can use these. And if this is working, I should be able to drop a debugger inside here, and we should be able to inspect those parameters and see objects there, with the exception of users. We might see nothing there. So jQuery, there's the jQuery selector. There's knockout with all of its beauty, and users is undefined because we've not returned anything from that. So far you can see that require is still working. That's fantastic. Require.js. And the next step that we're going to do, I actually have to start like Ralph started. So I'm going to start with some IDs inside here to say which users we want to track. So we're going to track, I've just got a few totally random numbers, 6380 and 1535478. This is the most fun of this entire talk. 405892. You guys could be looking these up if you wanted to get a little preview of who we're going to be tracking today. 54680 and 5. So that guy got in the gate early, whoever that is. Next thing we're going to do is jump over to our users module and start defining some of the logic over there. So the users section itself is going to have a couple functions inside there. One of them, since we're going to be working with knockout, we're going to be working with observables. Hands up if you know what observables are. Some of the coolest things in the world. They've really saved our sauce quite a bit of time whenever we're interacting with the DOM and objects and everything. So over here inside users, we're going to be starting with useStrict. So everyone should be using this. This is actually in that first default file as well. This is to keep your code clean and gorgeous. And then we're going to start with a users list, and this is going to be a knockout observable array. So this will actually handle all of the DOM tie-ins and the binding whenever we push items into the array or pop items off. This will actually go and just take care of all the DOM modifications for us. So we have our observable array. I'm going to actually start by saying I want to have a couple properties on that JSON object that's coming back from JSON, or from Stack Overflow rather. I want to make some of the properties on there observables. So we have observable props, and those are actually going to be the reputation observable. That's a special esoteric word that only I know. Observable, yes. So reputation is going to be one of them, and the other one is going to be answer count. So we should be able to see those update in real time if everything goes well. Next, we need to create a function called retrieve users. This is going to take an array of IDs, which we actually have on that last file, app.js, and we're going to do an old-fashioned jQuery AJAX call here. This method here literally changed my life as a young developer. So, okay, so we're going to be passing in the URL. That's http api.stackoverflow.com/1.1/users. I'm actually using the older version of the Stack Overflow API. Ralph is far cooler than me. So we're going to join the IDs that are coming in so we can concatenate those onto the URL itself, and then we're going to have a success callback here. And this callback is going to deal with the response data. Your keyboard is funny, Ralph. Okay. And we're going to use jQuery's each to actually iterate over that collection coming back. So on the response object, we have a users member, and we're going to pass in the index and the user. I assume most everybody here has used jQuery quite extensively, and you understand the each method and what type of parameters come back with that. So inside here, we're going to go ahead and push our items onto the user list itself. So that user list is the observable. As we push our user object onto that, that'll then fire off some mutation events on the observable array itself, which will go and update the DOM itself. I actually want to do a bit of a work here just before we do that. We want to make those properties on the object that we're interested in tracking. We want to make those observables. So I have another method here I'm going to call add observable props, I believe, or just add observables. And we're going to pass in the user, and we're going to pass in a reference to the observable props. And so this method, we'll go ahead and define it real quick. Observable props. Oops, no, I'm sorry. Add observables. And that takes in the object and the props. And then we'll just, because we're working, this is one of the cool things about Windows Store applications. You're only developing for one browser. And Internet Explorer 11 has got all the coolest stuff. So we can just use the for each method if we want to off props, rather than using jQuery's each method. But it's familiar to us, so you can choose your own destiny. So we're going to go into this, add in a function callback. We're going to get the props inside this callback. And then we're going to replace the object property with a knockout observable that is equivalent to the object property. So we're kind of we're converting these regular objects into observables and putting them back onto the object itself. So at this point, we are firing off our AJAX request over to Stack Overflow, getting our JSON data back, modifying the JSON object itself, switching its properties out for observables, and adding them back into the users list. So the last thing we need to do is actually reveal something from this module, because before it was undefined. So we're going to return from this just an object literal that has two properties. Users is going to match the users list or map to it, and we'll give it a method that they can call. So we'll actually map that to get users or retrieve users. And I think, what's that? Did I? Where am I seeing this? Oh, I see. You guys are so wonderful. If I had stars, I'd hand them out right now.
Peer programming.
Yeah, this is like, is everything okay now? Does anybody see anything? Thank you so much for not letting things break in front of me. Okay, so we should have the users module all defined now. We have our logic and functionality going back into the app section here. So let me just make sure everything is okay. I'll run the simulator, and then we can get stopped at that debug point. We'll check users. It's gorgeous. Okay, so there's methods and properties on it and stuff. Fantastic. Okay. So the next thing we need to do, actually from the apps section itself, we have all those IDs. We need to actually send those IDs into that function so we can get these individuals collected and put into our users list observable. So what we're going to do is switch back to my notes here. And I'm going to call the users dot get users, and we'll pass in the IDs there. I've actually got an interval here that I'm going to be adding momentarily, because all these individuals happen to be people who are attending the Build conference, and they're probably not at home answering questions on Stack Overflow. So we won't get to see them in real time gaining reputation and answering stuff. So we're going to be simulating that a little bit. The next thing we're going to do is just create a new constructor function. And this is going to be, oops, I did that a very weird way. I'm actually, so it's, you'll notice that on the return itself, the property is get users, and internally it matches to the retrieve users method. So thank you, though. So here we have a, we're going to create a new constructor function here. And this is going to be the base foundation of all of our bindings. So we're going to say this dot users is equal to users dot users. It's a little confusing, but for the same reason, you remember on the users object, we're actually returning an object literally that has a user property. So that should be user, if I'm not mistaken. It should be. So let me change this to users and just make sure I didn't mess this up anywhere. Everything looks good. So users.users. And then we're going to come down here. I'm going to use the longer form of document ready, since Ralph showed you the shorter form. Put it in an anonymous function callback, and we're going to call ko.applyBindings and pass in the new app object here. So we still haven't done anything that you can see yet. This is JavaScript. It's kind of where we all geek out. So we have to jump into default HTML now and delete this sad, sorry little paragraph. So inside default, we just put in a real basic kind of template of what we want. So we're going to have an H1 inside here. I'll add my stacker tracker so we don't forget what application this is. I'm going to add a UL here. And then inside the UL, we're going to have an image followed by a series of spans. So the UL itself is going to be iterating over the this.users collection on the app constructor function there. So what we're going to be doing is calling the data bind attribute. And then inside here, for each users. And I don't know why it's making that tab there, but that's something we were dealing with earlier. So this is going to actually be cycling over the contents of this UL will be repeated for each one of the users inside that collection there. The image itself, we're going to data bind to the attribute. We're going to set the source, and I need to have a colon there before attribute. And the source itself, we're going to do a bit of modification. We're going to concatenate http://gravatar.com/avatar. And we're going to add onto that the email hash. This is another property that's coming back inside the JSON data from Stack Overflow. That looks correct. Okay. Next, we have our span, and I'm going to do this one and then copy paste a few times. We're going to track the reputation, and there'll be another span inside here where we'll say data bind the text to the reputation. There's our beautiful tab there again. And I'll close that. And so we should just be able to copy this now a few times and modify the text inside there. So we're going to be tracking reputation, questions, and the answers. And I believe this is question count on the JSON object coming back and answer count on the JSON object coming back. So we save that, and I believe at this point, if everything has gone well, I should be able to fire this up and see it work. I just heard someone say something. So there we actually have all the data coming back. It's very hideous. We need to actually add some CSS to this. It looks like my list item. Is that what the comment was back there? Did someone catch that? Goodness, there we go. So we'll add our list item, and the formatting is all hideous. I'm very OCD about this stuff, so I cannot let that go. So we've got that. The application is nearly done. I think I need to go ahead and restyle this just a bit. So I've got some CSS here. Let me just copy that, and I'll go over and create a new CSS file, or I'll just jump into my CSS default file. Save that. And I should see a much better looking interface now of everyone's data. So that's looking good. I've got some little effects whenever I hover over them. People are rolling in and out. And then the last portion, of course, I wanted to update those values because they're observables. We went through all that trouble, and basically it would be terrible if we let that go to waste. So we'll jump back into the app.js section here. Switch over my notes so I can make everything work well at the right time. And we're going to add above this just a quick interval. So set interval, pass in the anonymous function we want to run at a 3,000 millisecond cycle. And then we're going to use jQuery's each again. Since we're working with observables in Knockout, you have to actually execute them like functions. So we're going to call users.users, and that results in the array that's kind of locked inside that observable array. We're going to cycle over each of the functions, and on each one of these, we will call, for instance, user.reputation. We have to execute that as a function. We're going to pass in maybe 10 or 19 or something, whatever my finger decides to type. User.reputation, we'll execute that, and we're just going to increment that by 10. And then the user answer count, since they can't get reputation from nowhere at all, they have to actually get that from answers. So if we save that, we should be all wrapped up here with a beautiful little demo that seems to be working. And there we go. Awesome. So that is what it will look like if they were all at home hurriedly answering questions on Stack Overflow. So that is all from me. That's just showing Knockout, Require.js, and jQuery all working in unison without any additional help or persuasion inside a Windows Store environment. So thank you.
So one quick little thing, one real-world example. So on June 19th, my son went in for some scheduled surgery, major surgery, actually. It was actually, he had brain surgery on both sides. He's actually still in the hospital. That's why I've got a little hospital tag on. So when he came out, he was very groggy, couldn't move he was having motor skill problems. He still is having trouble communicating. And the occupational therapist at the time was like, we should make him, a picture board, and he can, point at what things he wants, like a chair or a bed, he wants to go walk around or something. And, after a couple of days, the occupational therapist hadn't come around and made a picture thing, whatever, and I'm preparing for this talk, and I'm going, you know what? I can make one really easily, I'm sure, using, my web skills and in this Lenovo Yoga that has a touchscreen. I can put it into a desktop. So I'm not joking with you when I say it took me literally 15 minutes to create this little Jordan's picture. My son's name is Jordan. Create this little application where he can click on it, and he can, by touching this, he can, scroll around and touch what he wants. He wants his iPod. He's got a favorite blanket. He's like the Peanuts character there. He doesn't go anywhere without it. He wants to know, where his family is. Where's mom? At the time he was doing laps around ICU, and he would tell us, after a couple times he did one lap, he would tell us he wanted to do 2 laps. So, as a joke, I put in, I had two laps. So that made him laugh, which is really great to see him laugh. So, it's really easy to put this together. And I think the hardest part about putting this application together was finding the pictures. It literally took 15 minutes. I used the grid project, and all it is just configurable JavaScript objects, which was great. So I just wanted to share that. I thought that was great. Going back to, thank you. So going back to our slide deck. Just some resources for you. Jonathan and I put together a tutorial, when was that, a couple months ago now, right?
It's like 12 years ago.
12 years ago,
yeah.
No. On NetTuts, there's the full URL if you can get that down really quickly. I'm about ready to push button. Or you can use the short link, bit.ly/jQuery-win8. All of our code is up as of half an hour before the session started at github.com/append2/build2013-demos. And I'll come back to the slide. Thank you, everybody. We really appreciate you coming. And as a token of our appreciation, we have modern web stickers that you guys can come up, first 50 people. And we have some Append2 stickers as well. So thank you very much, guys.